It was April 1945, somewhere between darkness and surrender. Floodlights tore through the mist outside a captured German village. The ground was slick with thawing snow, the air thick with gun, oil and burned hay. Boots stomped. Commands echoed in accents the women didn't recognize. And then the unthinkable order on your knees. Dozens of German women, some in uniform, some in patched civilian coats, hesitated only for a second. Then, one by one, they knelt in the mud under the foreign light, clutching whatever dignity the war hadn't already stolen. There was no gunfire, no violence, just humiliation, deliberate and cold. The guards didn't smile, they simply watched. From a distance, a British sergeant lit a cigarette, its flame the only colour in the night. He wasn't cruel, just tired. Reports later noted that over 500 German women were captured during the collapse of the Reich. Many were clerks, medics, or radio operators who'd never held a rifle. Yet here they were lumped together as enemies of civilization. One woman whispered, "We're symbols now, not people." No one answered. The village behind them burned quietly, the faint pop of collapsing roofs mixing with wind. Some cried silently. Others didn't have the energy. The floodlights shifted again, finding one face in the crowd. Anna Vogel, 23, Luftwaffe auxiliary, ash smeared across her cheek. Her hands trembled, not from fear but exhaustion. In that moment she realized the war wasn't ending, it was only changing shape. An Allied jeep rolled by, splattering mud across their skirts. Somewhere inside an officer muttered, "They'll remember this." Maybe he was right. Maybe that was the point. Minutes stretched, knees dug deeper into the frozen ground. The humiliation wasn't just punishment, it was ritual, a visual closure to 6 years of fury. And as the wind howled through the ruins, Anna's mind flickered to her last radio post, static, coded messages, the sound of hope dying in Morse. A whistle cut the night, the guards motioned them up, trucks rumbled forward, their engines coughing clouds of smoke. The women rose stiffly, eyes hollow, lips cracked. No one spoke. The next order was simple, march, and as the engines growled to life, Anna took one slow breath. The mud clung to her knees, a mark that would outlast the war itself. Engines growled, headlights cut across the night, and the women began to march. Their boots had been taken, their socks soaked through with melted snow. Each step made a soft suction sound, mud pulling, refusing to let go. The order came again, sharper this time, move. Anna stumbled forward. Behind her, someone coughed blood into her sleeve. The line stretched for almost half a mile, German female POW, silent, shivering heads bent under a sky the colour of lead. The only light came from the Allied trucks ahead, taillights glowing red through mist like small, unreachable suns. A dog barked once, then again. Farther back, someone fell. No one stopped. The guards had their own exhaustion, their eyes hollow from years of the same war, different victims. They were leading the women toward an old storage barn converted into a temporary holding site. Anna tried not to think. Her knees still ached from the kneeling. Her fingers were numb. She couldn't even feel the thin fabric of her uniform. She wondered how long before dawn, how long before food. Reports later said temperatures that week hovered just above freezing. At least 1 in 10 prisoners fell ill within 48 hours of capture. The march had a rhythm: boots, breath, engine, wind. In between came small human sounds, a sob, a whisper, the rip of a coat sleeve. Someone prayed under their breath, not in German, maybe Polish. The war had mixed languages, enemies, and fates until they were unrecognizable. Anna's mind flickered back to her radio post, static, the code for retreat, then silence. Now the only code was survival. Keep moving, stay upright. A flare burst overhead, washing the world in white. She saw her reflection in a puddle, hair clumped with soot, eyes too old for 23. At the end of the road stood the barn, doors yawning open, light spilling out. The women were herded inside. Straw, diesel fumes, and the metallic smell of fear filled the air. The guards slammed the doors shut. Locks clanked, footsteps faded, darkness again. Someone whispered, "Is this where it ends?" Then a new light snapped on bright lamps, tables, men in uniform with clipboards. Interrogation time. The women exchanged glances. Anna felt her stomach twist. Whatever this was, it wasn't freedom yet. The barn doors opened again, flooding the space with harsh white light. A soldier shouted names off a clipboard. Anna's came third. She rose slowly, legs stiff from the cold floor, and followed the beam of a flashlight into another room. It wasn't what she expected. No cell, no torture instruments, just tables lined with lamps, papers, and men smoking through the fatigue of victory. Translators switched between English, Polish, and Russian, their words snapping in the air like distant gunfire. The women were seated one by one. A British intelligence officer leaned forward, voice flat, name, unit, duties. Anna answered in short, practiced German. But the questions that followed confused her. They weren't about ideology or loyalty. They were about factories, fuel shipments, typewriter serials, rail junctions. Allied intelligence was less interested in vengeance and more in blueprints. She blinked under the glare. For weeks, they'd been told the Allies would shoot them on sight. Instead, these men scribbled notes and offered her a cup of water. Reports later showed that over 200 female clerks and auxiliaries were interrogated within a single week, yielding maps, code sheets, and industrial data that would later shape Europe. Reconstruction across the table, the officer sighed. He was young, too young to look so old. We're not here to hurt you. He said through the translator, "Just answer." The line hit harder than threats. It didn't make sense. These were supposed to be enemies, yet the tone was almost bureaucratic, detached. From the far end of the hall came the rustle of a bread loaf torn in half. An Allied interpreter placed a chunk beside each woman's plate. The smell hit Anna first. Yeast warmth, the first real food in days. Her stomach twisted with shame as much as hunger. She thought of her own officers, who'd barked and struck without mercy. They didn't want revenge, she realized. They wanted information. The irony was unbearable. She was giving them what her own command never cared to protect: truth. Outside, dawn was coming up pale and uncertain. Inside, the women chewed quietly, trying to make sense of kindness in captivity. A guard's shadow crossed the doorway. "Next batch," he called. The officer nodded toward Anna's table. A hand slid a fresh loaf her way. "Eat," he said softly, "then rest." Anna stared at the small piece of bread in her hands. It was still warm, crust soft from the steam. The smell alone felt like a memory she had lost somewhere in 1943. Around her, the other women ate in silence, heads bowed, unsure if this was mercy or mockery. A medic entered, not a soldier, not an interrogator. Just a woman in khaki with tired eyes. She knelt beside Anna and unwrapped her frozen fingers. The skin was blue at the edges. Without a word, the medic rubbed ointment into the cracks and bandaged them carefully. The gesture was simple, almost domestic, but for Anna, it was the most disorienting moment of the war. She had braced herself for cruelty, for degradation. Instead, she was being treated like a patient. Reports later estimated that 60% of female German POW received better food and medical care under Allied custody than they'd had in their own field units. Reality fractured. A guard dropped a tin cup beside her. Soup sloshed over the rim, watery but real. Steam rose, curling upward into the lamplight. The heat hit her face, thawing something inside she hadn't realized was frozen. Across the room, another prisoner whispered, "Why are they feeding us?" No one answered. Maybe no one knew. Maybe pity was another form of control. The bread was gone in 2 bites. Anna felt it slide down her throat like hope disguised as food. She remembered the last rations her commanding officer had thrown at them. Stale biscuits, barked orders. They treated us better than our own did, she thought, guilt knotting with gratitude. A translator walked past, glancing at her bandaged hands. "You'll work soon," he muttered, laundry detail. His tone was flat, procedural, not unkind. work meant purpose and survival. For the first time since capture, Anna exhaled without fear. Outside, the night was breaking into a colorless dawn. The hum of trucks returned, engines warming up. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, cracked and off-key. The medic stood, wiping her hands on a rag. "Get some rest," she said quietly, before disappearing through the door. Anna sipped the last of her soup, eyes on the ripples fading in the cup. The steam blurred her reflection, fragile, temporary. In that blur, she saw what awaited her next, the endless rows of tents they now called home. By dawn, the trucks rolled again. The women were herded through a fog that clung low over the French countryside, each exhale ghosting in the cold. Anna's cup was still warm against her palm when she saw it. A sea of tents stretching to the horizon, canvas sagging under dew. The Allied camp in northern France, hastily built from surplus material, now held nearly 3-0 German female POW. Rows of barbed wire glittered faintly in the light, cutting the landscape into neat, controlled misery. A hand-painted sign on the gate read, "Transit Women." Inside, the air smelled of damp earth and boiled cabbage. The women moved like shadows, clutching their small bundles of belongings. A comb, a photo, a letter never sent. No one spoke loudly, voices carried too easily here. Anna was assigned to Tent 47, a canvas shell with 12 women and one rusted stove. Someone had pinned a piece of torn blanket to block the wind. In one corner, 2 former nurses were humming an old church hymn, their voices thin but steady. It was the only sound that didn't belong to the military. Reports later revealed that 90% of female POW were not combatants. They were secretaries, telephonists, nurses, the logistical backbone of a collapsing empire. Yet captivity didn't care for distinctions. The war had swallowed them whole, uniforms or not. At roll call, an Allied guard read names from a clipboard, mispronouncing most. When he reached Vogel Anna, she raised a hand out of reflex. He glanced up briefly, nodded and moved on. No cruelty, just indifference. That, somehow, felt colder. When night fell, the camp dimmed to a flicker of oil lamps. The women shared stories, whispered fragments of lost families, vanished towns, and brothers who never came back. Anna lay awake, counting the shadows on the tent wall. Somewhere beyond the wire, a guard's radio played a jazz tune, foreign, slow, beautiful. The melody seeped through the night like a memory from another world. Then came the notice, posted on the main pole at dawn. Printed in 2 languages, work assignments begin tomorrow. Anna stared at the words, the ink already bleeding from mist. She didn't know what kind of work awaited them, only that the waiting was over. The next morning, they'd trade their grief for labor. The whistle blew at first light, a sharp, metallic cry that sliced through the morning fog. Women stumbled out of their tents, clutching whatever passed for uniforms. Anna joined the line, heading toward a long wooden shed where steam poured from the open windows. The smell of soap and sweat hit before she even entered. Inside, chaos had rhythm. Buckets clanged, brushes scraped, and wet cloth slapped against wooden tables. This was laundry detail, the euphemism for punishment turned necessity. Each woman was assigned a task, scrubbing, rinsing, wringing, folding. An Allied sergeant barked orders in clipped English. 2,000 pieces a day, move faster. The words didn't need translation. The rhythm of survival had its own language. Anna dipped her hands into icy water, the sting immediate. The fabric was heavy, often streaked with mud and blood. They weren't washing civilian clothes, they were washing the uniforms of the men who'd beaten them. Reports later showed each group processed around 2-0 garments daily, 12 to 14 hours straight. The irony was too sharp to swallow. Beside her, a woman muttered, "We're cleaning for those who destroyed us." Anna didn't reply. She watched the soap foam rise and fall with each scrub, small clouds dissolving into grey water. The repetition numbed her mind, the pain in her fingers fading into mechanical motion. Every few hours, a guard would pass, counting stacks, checking progress. Some women hummed quietly to keep pace broken tunes from before the war. Others just stared at the endless pile, eyes hollow. When one girl's bandaged hand split open, the medic appeared again, same one from the interrogation room. She wrapped the wound, said nothing, and left. Kindness had become a ghost that drifted silently through routine. By evening, steam filled the shed like fog, clinging to faces, blurring everything into silhouettes. Anna wiped her forehead with a damp sleeve and found a torn patch tangled in the pile, a Luftwaffe insignia, her own side's emblem. She froze, staring at the frayed eagle, its wings half gone. For a heartbeat, the shed disappeared. She was back in her radio post, hearing the sirens, feeling the building shake. The sound of collapsing roofs blended with the hiss of boiling water. Someone shouted, "Next batch." The illusion broke. Anna tossed the insignia aside and kept scrubbing. But the memory refused to wash away. The Luftwaffe insignia lay on the table, soaked and half-torn. Anna stared at it until the colours bled into the grey wash-water. The hiss of the steam blurred into another sound, a siren. For a split second, she wasn't in the camp anymore. It was 1943. Berlin. The air smelled of iron and ambition. Posters shouted from every wall. Women of the Reich, serve with honour. Young faces smiled from propaganda sheets, proud and certain. Anna was one of them, 21, sharp, quick with numbers, desperate to matter in a country crumbling behind grand speeches. They called it opportunity, equal service for equal devotion, said the recruiter. What they meant was obedience. She joined the Luftwaffe Women's Signal Corps, tapping messages across Europe, codes, coordinates, fragments of orders. Her world became wires and static, the hum of machines drowning out doubt. By 1944, over 500,000 German women had been absorbed into the auxiliaries, typists, mechanics, radar operators. The war had turned them into cogs. Still, the uniforms felt powerful at first. Crisp collars, pressed fabric, the illusion of importance. Anna remembered standing in line during training, the instructor barking, "You're soldiers now." They weren't. They were ghosts feeding data into a dying empire, yet the lie was comforting. The flashback twisted darker, the winter of 44. Allied bombers painted the sky in fire. Anna watched from a bunker window as entire blocks disappeared. The ground shook like a pulse. Somewhere in the static of her radio headset, a message crackled through, "Hold the line." But there was no line left. She remembered the last transmission she ever sent, coordinates for a retreat near Castle. When the signal went dead, she kept tapping anyway, refusing to believe it was over. Now, in the laundry shed of 1945, she could almost hear it again, dots and dashes buried under the rhythmic splash of rinse water. Her hands trembled, still clutching that phantom key. Someone touched her shoulder. "You okay?" Another prisoner asked softly. Anna nodded, forcing a breath. The sergeant's voice cut through. "Faster, you work, you eat." Anna dropped the insignia back into the basin. The water clouded, swallowing the symbol whole. She wondered if Germany itself had drowned the same way, loud, proud, then suddenly gone. Outside, the bell rang for evening rations. Inside, her memories refused to quiet. Night folded over the camp like a worn blanket. The bell had stopped ringing hours ago, but few could sleep. The air inside Tent 47 was damp with breath and whispers. Anna sat cross-legged near the stove's dying glow, a scrap of paper balanced on her knee. She'd traded a bar of soap for a pencil stub earlier that day, a risky deal, but words had become her only currency. Around her, other women did the same, scribbling by candlelight, hiding their papers under sleeves when footsteps approached. Anna began with "Dear Mutty," then paused. She didn't know if her mother was alive or if home even existed anymore. Still, the motion of writing steadied her hands. She wrote about the cold mornings, the soup, the strange kindness of the medic. She didn't mention the kneeling. The letters were forbidden, of course. The guards called it contraband morale, but the women wrote anyway, as if the act itself could prove they were still human. Red Cross reports later confirmed that nearly 80% of female POW correspondence was censored or lost, shredded in post, or confusion. Anna folded her page carefully, pressing it flat with her palm. "You think they'll ever reach anyone?" whispered Marta, the nurse beside her. Anna smiled faintly. "Maybe, or maybe they're meant to reach ourselves, and outside, boots crunched along the mud paths." The faint glow of cigarettes drifted between tense guards on night rotation. When their shadows passed, the tent fell silent. Only after they faded did the whispering resume. One woman began reciting a poem from memory, her voice cracking on the last line. Another quietly sang a lullaby, more to herself than anyone else. For a moment, the war felt far away, replaced by the fragile hum of shared survival. Anna tucked her letter inside her boot, where the sole had split open. Tomorrow she'd look for a way to pass it to a supply driver or a sympathetic guard. Maybe someone would understand, maybe not. Wind rattled the canvas, scattering ash from the stove. She blew gently on her paper, as if sending a prayer through the smoke. Outside, something fluttered past the fence, a loose scrap caught by the breeze. A guard's flashlight flicked on. The beam found it mid-air, suspended for a heartbeat before falling into his hand. The beam of the flashlight froze everyone. Breath stopped mid-air. Anna's stomach twisted as the guard stepped closer, his boots sinking slightly into the wet mud. The scrap of paper was still in his hand, creased from the wind, its edges damp and curling. He didn't shout. He didn't call for the sergeant. He just stood there, reading by the thin cone of light. Anna could barely make out his face, young, unshaven, American by the look of his uniform. The silence stretched long enough for fear to settle deep in her chest. Finally, he exhaled through his nose, folded the paper, and looked up toward the tent. The flap fluttered open with a gust. His shadow spilled across the floorboards. Anna's pulse hammered. She rose slowly, ready for punishment. The guard held her gaze for a moment that felt like an eternity. Then he dropped the letter back through the flap. It landed at her feet untouched. He turned, muttered something she couldn't catch, maybe rules are rules, maybe forget it, and walked away. His flashlight beam bobbed down the path until it disappeared behind the latrine wall. For several seconds no one moved. Then Marta whispered, "He didn't report you." Anna bent down, picked up the paper, and pressed it to her chest. "Maybe he's tired of war too," she said quietly. That night, sleep finally came, heavy and fragile. When Anna woke at dawn, the same guard was on duty by the fence. He pretended not to notice her glance, staring straight ahead like the world had gone blank. Later, she'd learned that any guard caught fraternizing with POW could face 30 days of confinement, even court-martial. But the risk hadn't stopped him from looking away. It wasn't kindness, exactly. It was fatigue, the shared exhaustion of two sides that no longer believed in victory. The rumor spread through the camp by nightfall. Some guards aren't monsters. It wasn't hope, but it was something close. Anna folded the letter again, tucking it deeper into her boot. She promised herself she'd send it one day, even if the war had already swallowed its meaning. That same evening, an announcement crackled through the camp loudspeakers, new transfers arriving, medical checks required. Anna's name was on the list. By noon, the trucks were ready. Anna climbed aboard with a small group of women, the wooden floor slick with morning frost. The vehicle rattled along a dirt road lined with frozen puddles and leafless trees. The destination wasn't far, a field hospital repurposed as a medical screening station for incoming labor units. When they arrived, the air inside the building was warm, thick with disinfectant and smoke. The noise was constant, metal trays clattering, voices in different accents. The hiss of a sterilizer somewhere in back. Anna blinked under the fluorescent glare. After months of dim tents, the light felt violent. A nurse guided her toward a row of cots. She recognized the medic from before, the same calm face, same steady hands. "Sit." The woman said in accented German. No hostility, no pity, just instruction. Anna's boots came off, revealing cracked heels and raw blisters. The medic dabbed them clean, wrapped them in gauze. "You've walked too far," she murmured. Anna wanted to answer, but her throat tightened. Around her, the room moved with quiet efficiency. Allied medics bent over thin bodies, measuring pulses, checking eyes, treating frostbite. No uniforms mattered here, just temperature, infection, survival. Red Cross documents later noted over 1,200 female POW treated in Western Europe by June 1945, many for malnutrition and exposure. One woman nearby whispered, "They're healing the enemy." Another replied softly, "Maybe they're healing themselves." Anna lay back on the cot, eyes on the ceiling beams. The smell of iodine mixed with the faint scent of soap. For the first time in months, she felt warmth without fear attached to it. The ceiling fan spun lazily, its blades ticking like a clock too tired to keep time. A doctor passed by, clipboard under his arm. "You'll be moved again," he told the medic, reconstruction detail. The words carried no explanation, but Anna heard the unspoken meaning, labor again. Yet beneath it, a strange comfort lingered. She was being moved because she was strong enough to work. When the medic finished bandaging, she slipped a small piece of bread into Anna's pocket. For later, she said. Outside, the trucks idled. The same wind that once carried gunfire now smelled faintly of spring. Anna looked down at her wrapped feet and thought, maybe the body remembers before the heart does. Engines roared. The convoy rolled toward a horizon lined with factory smoke. The trucks rumbled through miles of broken countryside, past fields where rusted tanks slept half, buried in mud. When they stopped, the air was heavy with oil and machinery. Before the women stood a sprawling depot, endless warehouses, cranes, pipelines. Allied flags flapped on every building. Anna climbed down, eyes wide. It wasn't a camp this time. It was industry, alive, loud, and endless. The guards handed them gloves and pointed toward the assembly sheds. Inside, engines roared like caged beasts. Rows of workers, POWs, locals, soldiers moved in perfect rhythm, feeding crates, loading trucks, rolling barrels. The scale was staggering. Reports indicate Allied forces were producing over 700 tanks per month by early 1945, compared to Germany's fading 350. The women watched convoys stretch for miles, a metal river that never ran dry. Anna's task was small, labeling crates. But every box she stamped carried the same mark, made in Detroit. The words hit harder than any order barked at her. Her entire war had been built on the idea of German precision, German strength. Now, standing in a sea of Allied abundance, she felt the illusion crumble. Marta, beside her, whispered, "How can anyone fight this?" Anna didn't answer. She just watched as a conveyor belt rolled past stacked with canned food, spare parts, cigarettes, luxuries she'd once associated with victory. Here they were logistics. The guards weren't cruel. They didn't need to be. The sight of unending production was punishment enough. Every hiss of steam, every engine's roar whispered the same truth. You never stood a chance. At lunch break, an Allied mechanic offered Anna a cigarette. She took it with trembling fingers, unsure if she was allowed. He nodded once, eyes tired. "Smoke's free," he said. She didn't understand the words, but the gesture translated perfectly. Outside, she saw trucks forming convoys bound for the front, thousands of gallons of fuel, food, ammunition. The sky smelled of diesel and inevitability. Anna realized the war hadn't been lost in trenches or bunkers. It had been lost here in the rhythm of factories that never slept. When the shift whistle blew, she looked down at her hands, ink-stained, trembling. The same trucks she'd helped load would drive past another camp tomorrow, and there more women would see what she now knew. Victory was manufactured. The next morning, the depot was already roaring before sunrise. The sky glowed with furnace smoke, trucks lining up like veins feeding a mechanical heart. But somewhere within that rhythm, something small began to shift, a silence that wasn't submission. The women had been ordered to sing during work hours, Allied marching songs piped through crackling speakers. Morale music, they called it. The guards said it kept labor steady. For the first few hours, the voices complied, low and unconvincing. Then, slowly, they stopped. No words, no melody, just the sound of cloth dragging across crates and metal, scraping on the floor. Anna kept her head down, lips pressed shut. Marta glanced at her, nervous, but followed. Within minutes, the warehouse was filled with the heavy quiet of defiance. It wasn't loud enough to be rebellion, but loud enough to be noticed. The foreman shouted something in English. No one moved faster. The work continued, deliberate and measured obedience wrapped in resistance. Later reports recorded at least 3 hunger strikes and several passive protests by female POW groups between May and July 1945. This was one of them, invisible, unplanned, entirely human. When the lunch bell rang, the women sat still, hands on their knees. The guards didn't know what to do. They'd been trained to control violence, not silence. One officer finally switched off the loudspeakers. The music died mid-note, leaving the sound of wind through the broken windows. Anna looked up. The world had never sounded so honest. That night, the camp was quieter than usual. Instead of orders, a faint song floated from the guard post, a scratchy radio tune drifting across the fence, Lily Marlene. It was the same song German soldiers had played on their radios during the war. Now, the same melody came from Allied hands. For a few moments, no one was an enemy. Anna lay awake, listening. The words were half, lost in static, but the tone was unmistakable longing. Somewhere in that mix of signal and silence, she felt something loosen inside her. The next day, she returned to work as usual. No one mentioned the singing, but everyone knew it had mattered. That night, Anna began teaching Ma, to English words she'd picked up from the guards. One of them was freedom. It sounded strange in her mouth, too light to belong to her yet. Days melted into weeks. The warehouse noise dulled into background rhythm, a heartbeat of machinery and monotony. For Anna, time was no longer measured in hours or dates, but in the slow, steady repetition of survival. Work, eat, sleep, repeat, but somewhere inside that cycle, something new began to grow. Between the shifts, the women started trading words instead of rations, English for German, French for fragments of lullabies. Anna became their quiet teacher. Her voice was soft, her gestures patient, like she was rebuilding language itself from the ashes. They wrote simple phrases on scraps of packing paper. Thank you, tomorrow, still alive. It wasn't rebellion, but it was healing. Each word carried the weight of defiance, of proof that they were still thinking, still human. The guards noticed but didn't stop them. Maybe they saw the same exhaustion in themselves. Historians later documented literacy programs emerging informally in at least 9 Allied POW camps across Western Europe. Most started by the prisoners themselves. No one ordered it. It just happened. People reaching for meaning when war had stripped everything else. Anna's lessons grew into small gatherings at night. They'd sit behind the storage crates, whispering, repeating words until they stuck. Marta practiced the phrase, "the war is over," though it never sounded right on her tongue. By summer's edge, the tension of capture had softened into a strange coexistence. Some guards shared cigarettes, others shared silence. The same men who once barked orders now handed out pencils, pretending not to see the lessons happening in the shadows. Anna realized she no longer hated them. That scared her most of all. Hatred had been her armor, simple, clean, dependable. Without it, she was just a girl with tired hands and unfinished sentences. One night, while they practiced quietly, a rumor drifted through the camp. Repatriation lists were being prepared. No one believed it at first, but the guards' glances had changed, less watchful, more distant. Something was shifting again. Anna folded her scrap of paper, the one that said "still alive," and tucked it inside her jacket. For the first time, it didn't feel like wishful thinking. Outside, the wind carried the faint hum of trucks arriving. Their engines didn't sound like dread anymore. They sounded like possibility. Tomorrow the names would be read. The rumor became reality at dawn. The entire camp was awake before the whistle, huddled outside the barracks beneath a pale morning sky. Frost glimmered on the barbed wire like glass. A clipboard rested in the hands of an Allied officer, the same soundless authority that had ordered them to kneel months ago. Anna's breath fogged as he began to read. Names rolled out like verdicts, slow, methodical, impossible to predict. Each one was followed by a reaction, a cry, a laugh, a collapse into someone's arms. The women clung to one another, torn between hope and guilt. "Those who are called," the translator announced, "prepare for transport tomorrow. You are going home. Home." The word landed like a punch. For many, home was a crater, a burn. Doubt Village, a memory buried under rubble. Records indicate that by 1947, over 50,000 German female POW were repatriated, a mass return that felt less like freedom and more like exile in reverse. Anna's stomach knotted. The names kept coming. Marta's was read halfway down the list. She gasped, hands trembling. "I'll see you there," she whispered to Anna, voice breaking. Then came the pause. The officer flipped a page, squinting. Vogel, Anna. It took her a second to process it. She didn't move until Marta shoved her gently. The sound of her own name echoed in her ears like a signal from her old radio, faint but unmistakable. She stepped forward to confirm. The officer nodded, his expression unreadable. He stamped her papers and moved on. Just like that, 6 months of captivity became a line crossed off a page. That night, the camp buzzed with a nervous energy. Women packed what little they had, scraps of paper, letters, bits of cloth. Others wept quietly, unable to reconcile freedom with everything they'd lost. Anna sat by the fence one last time. Across the yard, the guard who'd once spared her letter was smoking alone. For a moment, their eyes met through the haze. No words, just recognition, two people bound by the same exhaustion. The next morning, trucks would carry them east, back toward the ruins they'd once called life. Anna lay awake, repeating one thought over and over. Freedom doesn't feel real until you start moving toward it. The engines would start at sunrise. Engines coughed awake in the grey morning. The trucks lined up like tired beasts ready to pull history backward. Anna climbed aboard with Marta and 24 others, their bundles small enough to fit beneath the benches. The wood smelled of diesel, sweat, and something else, anticipation mixed with fear. The convoy moved slowly, tires grinding over gravel roads that cut through a broken Germany. Through the canvas flaps, Anna watched the world she'd once served slide past in silence. Villages reduced to skeletons. Churches without spires. Rows of chimneys that led nowhere. For miles, not a single voice rose in song or speech. Only the steady rhythm of the engines, and the creak of the truck's suspension as it carried them deeper into the wreckage of their own country. They passed what had been castle, a landscape of hollow walls and blackened beams. Anna remembered sending coordinates from here 2 years ago. Now there was nothing left to locate. Her radio signals had outlived the city itself. A Red Cross escort rode ahead, its flag snapping in the wind. Behind it, the convoy stretched for miles, truck after truck filled with women whose uniforms no longer fit, whose faces all looked older than the calendar said they were. Germany had lost nearly 5 million civilians by war's end. The number was impossible to imagine, but the silence on that road made it real. Every empty field, every cracked window, was a ghost that didn't need haunting. Marta leaned close, whispering, "We're free." Anna looked out at the wasteland and said nothing. Freedom felt heavier than chains. At a brief stop, children appeared from the ruins barefoot, eyes too large. They didn't shout or beg. They just watched as the trucks idled. One little girl held up a daisy, its petals shaking in the wind. Anna reached down, took it, and tucked it into her jacket pocket. The gesture was too gentle for this place. As the convoy moved again, distant church bells rang, cracked, hesitant. as if unsure they still had permission to sound. Anna closed her eyes, hearing their uneven rhythm. It reminded her of the first night of captivity, the same sound but inverted. Back then, she'd knelt in mud. Now she was standing unsteady but upright. And somewhere ahead, home waited, if home still existed at all. Years later, the sound of engines still lived somewhere in Anna's dreams. But when she woke now, it wasn't to shouting or sirens, it was to birds, to the creak of her garden gate, to the slow rhythm of a shovel cutting soil. The war was gone, at least on paper, yet its ghost lingered in the way people spoke softly in train stations, or how men still flinched when thunder rolled. Germany was rebuilding, but for millions like Anna, rebuilding wasn't about walls. It was about silence, about learning how to exist without orders. She lived in a small house on the edge of Castle, the same city she'd once reduced to coordinates. The fields were green again. The rivers ran clear. But every spring, when the wind carried the scent of wet earth, the memories came back. The floodlights, the mud, the command to kneel. This morning, she was in her garden, sleeves rolled, planting seeds. The ground was damp, rich with rain. She pressed her knees into it, not out of submission, but steadiness, a different kind of kneeling. One that meant life, not surrender. Neighbors sometimes whispered when they saw her. Some remembered her uniform, others her work in the camps. But she never corrected them. She had learned that explanations didn't change the past, only actions did. Post-war records show that over 3 million women across Europe were displaced in the aftermath of the conflict, rebuilding nations, raising children, and carrying scars no one catalogued. Anna was one of them, though she never called herself a survivor. She called herself awake. She kept one relic from the war, a tin cup, dented and dull, the same one that once held her first warm soup in captivity. Every morning she filled it with water for the flowers. The metal was cold in her hands, grounding, real. Sometimes she thought about the guard who looked away, or the medic who wrapped her hands, or the hymn sung in Tent 47. Small mercies that outlasted ideology. The world had forced her to kneel once. It had broken her pride, her illusions, and her certainty. But when she stood again, she carried something stronger than victory, the quiet conviction that humanity survives even in humiliation. She pressed another seed into the soil and whispered, "We stood up different." The wind answered softly, like history exhaling.